I'm John Clark. It is Tuesday, I believe, December 27th, 2016, and I'm here with Julie Bango, and that's Bango, right?
That's right, yes.
And your address is?
43 East Kossuth Street.
A little cottage that you say was built well over 100 years ago.
1886.
How do you know it was 86? Have you done some research on
We
the
did
house?
a little research to find out about the house, and then there was a small addition built on the back that was a porch. Now it's our kitchen, and that was built in 1895.
Have you done much to it in the, 21 years I think you said that you've had it here?
We have not. We enjoy the house as it is and enjoy older things. So no, we haven't done too much to it. Just tried to keep it in as good a shape as we can, because that's very important to us to be part of this legacy of German Village.
Now I should mention that us is you and your husband John Saunders.
That's right.
Who might be best known in the neighborhood as a bartender at the Old Mohawk.
That's right. He's one of the two iconic bartenders at the Old Mohawk. He also grew up in German Village. Both of us spent part of our childhood here in the village. It was romanticized by our parents. We had wonderful memories here as children and wanted to come back then once we were married and had a home together.
So one thing I wanted to mention is you have something that I think, as an armchair historian and someone who loves trivia, you have something very special in your backyard that not a lot of even villagers have today from the past, and that is?
An outhouse. Yes, and it's an outhouse, and that was one of the first things we did when we came here. We excavated under the outhouse. We found some really neat treasures, broken pieces of pottery, a metal mug, and some other things. And actually, when we moved in, the outhouse had a methane smell to it. So we removed the flooring, dug it up, filled it in, and then put a new floor in. But we've wanted very much to keep it in its original state as much as possible. The other really neat thing about this outhouse is that it was a two-seater outhouse. One door is in our yard, and the other door and the other half of the outhouse is in our neighbor's house just around the corner. So this lot was known as the Dumig lot, and our home, a newer home at the corner of City Park and Kossuth, and then a little house, another cottage just around the corner from us on City Park, were all owned by the same family.
So at one time the property was split, and it was split right through the middle of the outhouse, right? Sort of?
Sort of. All but about 6 inches of the outhouse is on our property. But in the middle of the outhouse, there's a barrier now so that there could be, so most of the exterior is on our property, but there's a little easement then. Those people have our property inside their outhouse.
And you both use it for storage now, correct?
It's used for storage now for both of us. I had a wonderful German gentleman come to the house when we moved in to share a bit of the history, and he said these outhouses were generally moved in the backyard, but it looked like ours was a pretty permanent structure and probably shared, you know, between the two homes. Perhaps this was one brother and another brother, or a grandmother and the children, and it looked like a permanent structure to him, so it hadn't been moved.
Do you remember anything else that he told you about the outhouses down here?
Well, they were very common. That was one thing. There were other things he told us about the house. We had only a hole cut in the ceiling for the second floor, so we had no heat up there or ductwork. And he was so tickled to see that. He said that it was just gravity heat, and that we would have, he knew where every fireplace would have been and where a pot-bellied stove would have been. And he said in the morning, you know, the kids would run down the stairs and get dressed by the pot-bellied stove, which would be where our dining room is now. So it was wonderful to have him come into the house and say, oh gosh, there are just two of you here. This probably would have been a family of 8 to 10 people in this 1,000-square-foot home. So yeah, it was great to have him come in.
And this is pretty much like most of the other 1.5-story cottages throughout the village, right?
That's right, a front gabled 1.5 story. And I think when we first moved into the village, our home was, they kind of grade the homes to say if they're pristine, and so with as little change as possible over the 100-year history. Ours was not pristine. At this point it is. So the only real changes I think in this house is that there is still aluminum siding on the back addition, and we'll remove that at some point and restore the wood. But it's a pretty great home, and very much like the home would have been seen in the 1800s.
I think a lot of the reasons that the term pristine was not used for some of these cottages is because so many of them have dormers these days. Right? And they were added, of course, before the time that we had commission rules and regulations.
That's right, and ours doesn't have a dormer. So the first night I was here, I thought, I'm only 5 feet tall, my husband's 6 feet tall, and I thought, especially downstairs, the ceilings are very high downstairs, I thought, oh gosh, this house is huge, it's going to be wonderful. But it was a little claustrophobic the first night for me to be in that dormered bedroom, but now it's fine, and now we're in style, we're a tiny house. Right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That's right. So it's a great place. It's plenty big. I've even thought that we could probably go down one room.
I should go back, Julie, and ask, if you don't mind, when you were born.
In 1958, and my mom and dad had a small apartment on Pearl, on the 900 block of Pearl, and my father was the owner of the Hay Hay. So
Your father was?
He was, yes.
I didn't. You may have mentioned that to me one time.
Yes.
We've been joined by someone. Who's this?
Well, this is Lily. She is one of the most popular girls in German Village. She's my husband's long-legged blonde. His long-legged blonde, or his blonde bombshell, I like to say.
And she certainly is a friendly, happy dog.
Well, she is.
Who gets a lot of walks.
And can sit anywhere she likes in the house.
Of course.
Yeah.
Probably more places than you or Johnny.
That's right. She has free reign. But
well,
oh, go ahead, please.
No, please, go ahead.
Well, my dad owned the Hay Hay, so for the first 2 years of our life, I lived in German Village. Then my parents, bought their starter home. And, but he continued to have businesses here. He owned the Hay Hay. He also owned the Tremont. And then worked at many bars downtown.
Now the Tremont is still there on South High.
That's right,
correct?
yes.
It looks like they've been undergoing some rehabilitation lately.
It has, and I've walked by before, and I have great memories of that as a child going in there. And actually the piano from the Tremont was in this house. It's now with one of my nieces. And my piano teacher was Mr. Wendell Hawkins. He was a jazz pianist here in town and also played the piano in my dad's bar. So there are just many great memories of being down here in the village as a kid, being in the Tremont, and to visit my dad and visiting other places down here as well.
What were the names of your parents?
Joe Bango and Nora Bango.
And Nora is she from down here as well?
She is. Both my dad's family are from Naples, Italy. They came here, worked in pit bands in New York City, and then moved to Rochester, Pennsylvania to work in the steel mills, and then were glass blowers, so they came to Federal Glass. So that's their family history. And
your mother's maiden name?
Weirs. So a good W-E-A-R-S, a good German name.
Okay.
They also, her father was a meat cutter and worked for Kroger, and that was down on Marion Road. So both families were down in this end of town. My mother met my dad at the Hay Hay. She had gone in there for lunch one day. And the story is, he said, "Excuse me, ma'am, could you help me hang a picture?" And she said, sure, she'd be happy to help him. And he asked her to hold the picture against the wall, so she held up this picture of a baseball team that he supported. And he then put the nail against the frame and was going to nail the nail right through the frame into the wall. She said at that moment she knew he needed a wife, and so that was the beginning of their love story.
For what years do you know, what period of time did your father own the Hey Hey?
You know, in the 50s. So I don't remember that, but I know that that's when he had it, yeah.
And it was called the Hey Hey.
And it was called the Hey Hey.
I believe it was called the Hey going back to the 30s, perhaps.
Right. I think it was the Hey Hey when he had it as well. And then he owned the Tremont, and I remember that. We were small kids then, so I would say between 5 and 8, somewhere in there. He also owned what is now Roosters, and that was the Schiller House. So he had that as well.
I've wondered about that. I don't know a lot of the history, but do you know, going back 2 or 3 or 4 businesses, what was in Roosters? And we're talking about the Roosters on the southwest corner of City Park and Whittier.
And Whittier, right. Before it was Roosters, it was Park Place. So, and that was a really fun place that a lot of us went to in our 20s. So they had live music there and a lot of folk music. And it was a really fun place. And then before that, I'm not sure, before that, the Schiller House. And it was the Schiller House for more than one owner. Mm-hmm.
Was that more of a restaurant or a restaurant bar?
It was a restaurant, yeah. Yeah, there was a bar there as well, but a restaurant, seafood and steaks and that kind of thing.
I've heard about seafood being a popular dish there in one of its previous incarnations,
that's right,
before Roosters came along.
Yeah.
So your dad had the Tremont on South High,
yes,
and he had the Hey Hey over on Whittier.
That's right.
And also the Schiller House.
Yes.
Here
yes.
where Roosters is.
Yes, and it's really interesting. The Tremont, when he had the Tremont, that was a bar where many of the Columbus police officers and would congregate after their day at work. And we have a great friend that's a bartender over at the Old Mohawk now, P.J. McSweeney. And the first time we met, he said, "Oh, your dad owned the Tremont." And I said, "Right." And he said, "It was my dad that put the school clothes on your back," because that was a place that all the guys would go to after work to sit and talk. His dad was a detective, to sit and talk about their cases and their day. Yeah, so it's a small world down here.
Interesting. And of course, the Hey Hey today is known for its owners, Tim and Sue Gall.
That's right.
And they have music. They have her famous sauerkraut balls. Did the music at that end of the Hey Hey go back to the day when your dad owned it?
You know, I don't know that. My dad certainly loved jazz music and loved music very much, but I can't say that I know that about the Hey Hey. Sue and Tim have called us before to ask certain questions about what the Hey Hey looked like and things like that, I think when they were doing their remodel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they've discovered, I think in the past 2 or 3 years, a beautiful old ghost sign on the outside of either their building or the building across the street, where there had been a sign painted on the side of the building, and most of it had been obliterated over time, and they've been able to scrape away certain layers of paint.
Well, that was a great corner at one time. You know, Herbie Wolf Florist was across the street. Then he and his wife, Manna, lived in a beautiful home behind there. So my dad and Herbie Wolf were good friends, and often we were visited their home and enjoyed their company. So they were a wonderful company, or couple.
The florist was across Whittier?
He was just across Whittier, that's right. Yeah, so there's an art gallery there now.
Okay.
That's right,
right.
Yeah.
So you said you were born in 58, and
That's
your
right.
first couple of years were here
That's
while
right.
your parents owned these restaurants and bars.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point your family moved out of the South End?
No, they moved further south, and so to 43207, into their starter home, which they remained in throughout their lives. So, but his businesses then were always still here in the village. And so we have many great memories as children of coming here and going to the Golden Eagle, or for ice cream, or the Nutcracker. I don't know if you have any information about that, but Carol Millison was a teacher at our elementary school, and she owned that shop. And we even spent the night above the Red Stable and did all kinds of things. She was just a wonderful teacher and a wonderful friend to our family. and we did things with
I want to
them.
hear more about that, but I suppose we should let people know that you're recently retired as a teacher.
That's right.
And tell me a little bit about your long career in teaching.
Well, let's see, I have 35 years of service as a teacher, and I ended my career the last 20 years at Upper Arlington, with the Upper Arlington Public Schools, 20 years at the high school, and I was a special education teacher working with students with severe and profound disabilities.
And you retired in what year?
Oh gosh, 2013.
13. Now, I don't know Carol Millison. I don't know that name, but when my wife Jan and I moved here in early 1992, there was the Nutcracker in the American Foursquare House that's on the southeast corner of Willow and South 3rd, where John and Jeannie Barnes later lived. That was the Nutcracker then, and I believe it had been at one time across the street where Cup of Joe and now Stoff's is.
That's
I've seen
right.
photos.
That's right. And then that became a bank, I think, later.
Railroad Savings and Loan.
That's right, yeah. And so those were her first two shops. And then she also owned the Red Stable at one point, too. And she was a wonderful teacher. I have to think that must have been one of the first gift shops down here.
Probably so.
Because the bank, golly Neds, the bank was here in the 80s, I think. Does that sound right to you?
That sounds right from what I've investigated.
So I think her shop was there before that, as I recall.
And what I understand is the front of that building where Stoff's is now, that whole facade was created for Railroad Savings and Loan. And when you look up at the top of the facade, you'll see a date. And a lot of people may think that that date refers to when that building was built, but actually that date refers to the year that Railroad Savings and Loan began as a business.
Oh, that's very interesting.
So it's bound to be very confusing for anybody who is interested in that sort of trivia.
Right, yes. I had an account there at Railroad Savings.
So your earliest memories would have been from visiting the village as, a kid, 10 or 12?
Oh, even younger than that. And I think, my parish was not St. Mary's Parish, it was St. Ladislaus Parish, but we all did things together. My mother also worked downtown, so she would walk to Schiller Park and we would meet her at the park. So I remember the baby pool, which was a small pool at the park, and they had a roundabout, one of those merry-go-rounds, which was, metal, death-defying metal. And running down the hill, going ice skating at the park. So the whole entire community really enjoyed the park and used the park. I remember those few years that the Oktoberfest was in the park. That was only a few years, I believe, that it was in the park, but oh my gosh, that was wonderful.
Yeah, late 60s, I believe.
Yeah.
What years are we talking about that you're recalling now? Is it the 60s primarily?
I would say yes, the 60s. And then I moved, the 60s, and I would say this, I've just been a part of Durham Village so long it all goes together. I would say the 60s, and then I came back here to live after college in the 80s, and I lived at 630 Pearl.
Oh.
Yep, and that was a wonderful house, and a great time here in the village as well.
How did you and John meet?
He, that's a story. His best friend was the brother of my best friend. And also another brother dated my sister. So we had never met, had this common core of friends from one family. And we were taking one of the boys to the airport, and that's how we finally met. So we had crossed paths, I guess, maybe for about 15 years, but didn't meet until one of the guys was moving, and we took him to the airport together.
And you were married in what year?
Oh, gosh, oh, no. This is a story. I don't know. Maybe, I hate to say, I don't know, 95, I think. 95. Yeah, that's a story of ours. I came home one day from being out and about, and he was supposed to be at work, and John is so quiet. He had his arms crossed, and he said, "Where have you been?" And I said, "Where have I been? Why are you home?" And he said, well, it's our anniversary. I took the night off so we could be together. And I said, well, it's not our anniversary. Our anniversary is the 10th. He said, our anniversary is the 6th. I said, no. And so we went and got the marriage license, and it was the 8th. So we were,
You're both wrong.
we were both wrong.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about his family. You said because his roots are down in this end of town too.
Yeah, that's right. His family, he grew up off of Grant Street in another beautiful orange brick home. He had 6 brothers and sisters. His dad, one of his dad's job was he was a sign painter and just beautifully artistic work. And in that house, there was a small studio for him to do that work. His memories include where the flower shop is on Grant. That was a carry-out at one time.
Oh.
And he remembers going over there as a young child. But he has the same memories I do, good memories of Schiller Park, of growing up in an area with lots of kids and good neighbors. And obviously there's something about this that's so nostalgic that it brings us back. So when we looked at a house and where we wanted to live, we knew this is the only place we wanted to be.
The neighborhood gets a bad rap from some people who say the 60s, especially the early 60s, were not an especially good time for this neighborhood because it had been in decline. But we also like to tell people that it was a working class neighborhood. There were plenty of families down here, schools.
That's right.
It wasn't perhaps as bad as some people make it out to be.
No, I think one memory I really have is being with my dad, and we were going for ice cream. And it was important for him that we would dress up, so we would put on little dresses and gloves and everything to come down here. And I'll never forget, there was a lady sweeping her sidewalk out front, and my dad saying, "This is a wonderful neighborhood. These are people who care about their property, and this is a good thing for you to see." And so I distinctly remember that about German Village, and it was very important to him. He would take us all over the city, so we would go to Old Town East, and he would show us the homes there and say how beautiful they are. And talk about how difficult it would be for people to live in those now because of the utility prices or whatever. He would take us down Parsons Avenue and show us beautiful homes down there, and there really were some wonderful homes down there. But, and as I said, he romanticized German Village so much, and he never lived to know that I moved down here in a home.
Oh.
And I think it would have tickled him to death to know that. And I'm sure there are a million stories about this. He did say, because he had businesses down here, we had the chance to move down here. But he liked the idea of having a yard for his kids. And so that was what kept him from coming back down here.
But did he continue to work down here with his businesses?
He had businesses down here, yes, until he decided not to have businesses anymore. And then he worked at the Top of the Center and the Christopher Inn, some of the higher end bars in town.
Tell me a little bit about those, because that's before my time. And I know there's a lot of nostalgia associated with some of these older restaurants and bars.
Oh,
in
absolutely.
downtown Columbus.
Yeah. Well, the Christopher Inn was beautiful. That was on Broad Street, and it was a round building, which was a big deal here, just architecturally. The Top of the Center was another really wonderful restaurant, and when different entertainers would come into town, those would be the restaurants and hotels that they would stay in. So there were wonderful stories. As I said, my dad loved music and had won a city dance contest here years ago. So he loved music and to dance. And there was a time when he was working and Count Basie had come into the bar, for a late night drink. And my dad, who thanked him for the music he had shared over the years, and he said, he was very sorry he couldn't come to the concert that night. And Count Basie said, well, let's play. And he ended up playing almost all night.
For your dad?
For my dad. And that just meant the world to my dad as someone who was a worker and wasn't able to go to things. And then my dad had, again, he had a great love for things of beauty. So when the Ohio Theater was going to close, again, we put on the white gloves and our little dresses. He took us everywhere. And he took us to the theater to show us how beautiful it was. And at that point, they really thought it would close. So it was great excitement for our family that they ended up saving it, that, you know, Kappa saved it. And he did the same things with Kinley Players, if you've heard of them.
No.
Oh gosh, Kinley Players was here in Columbus, and you know, Columbus was still a very small town, but they were at Betts Memorial, and they had different stage plays every year. So we had season tickets to that and would go every year to those. And we were very fortunate. We got to go backstage and meet Paul Lynde and different performers of that day, and they were always very gracious and kind to us. And I'm sure that part of that was because of these the bars tending that he did in those places.
Because certainly there were suburbs and shopping centers starting to go up outside the city, but I get the impression, I'm sure you can tell me, that downtown was still the place to be as far as a lot of the entertainment, the restaurants, the bars.
That's right, yes, yes.
Tell me more about what you recall from your childhood of the village. And let me ask you, do you remember it before the freeway went in, before the I-70-71 split?
You know, I can't say that I remember that, but surely we were down here all the time at that point. I do think it was more of a neighborhood then. I remember my dad pointing out houses around, and he would say, oh, well, you know, at one time that was a bar, and this was a bar. So really people within their block, there could be a bakery, a grocery, a bar, and a restaurant to go to. One of our favorites as a family was the Old Mohawk. And it was a big treat for me on my birthday to get to go to the Old Mohawk and have seafood. So that was a big deal for us. I would say I remember my dad being a little bit worried at one time that we would lose German Village. And of course, that was a real threat. So that had to have been at that time with the freeway. But again, that nostalgia. He loved history. Was a great historian, and so he would take us as young kids to these places to show them to us and show us the history of them and their importance.
How long ago did you lose your father?
He's been gone since 1995.
I would love to have met him.
Oh my goodness, he was just a wonderful, wonderful man.
Yeah. And your mother?
She passed away just 7 years ago. So yeah, she was 20 years younger than my dad.
Oh, okay.
Yes, yes.
So what other places? You mentioned Golden Eagle Ice Cream, which is where, of course, G. Michael's is now.
That's
correct?
right, right.
Do you remember about when that was open? 70s, 80s? Oh,
I would say it had to be the 70s, because we had friends that worked there in high school, and so I would say, and you know, that they had two different things happen there. It was a small shop at first, and then they built that addition, which is still in the back, that one story.
Oh, the dining room back there at G. Michael's.
Right. So that was a second addition that was built later on.
Onto the ice cream shop.
Onto the ice cream shop, right. So she had the small shop at first, and then she expanded there. And that had to be the very early 70s.
Who had that? Do you remember her name?
No, but my goodness, I see her in front of me right now with a little brown beehive, a very thin, small woman, very kind. And that was just such a treat. It seemed like there were 1,000 different ice cream flavors there. And my dad's was black licorice. They even had black licorice ice cream. Yeah, so that was a fun place to go to. I remember the Ohio on the corner, and that was on the corner of Livingston and 3rd. So there was a gas station there. Yes. And always remembering, just thinking, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be great if that were gone? Because it covered up Schwartz Castle, and we thought Schwartz Castle was so beautiful. And so, and then also there were a few gas stations.
I was going to say, do you remember the others? There was the one that I don't recall the cross street, but it's where a realty office is now, across from Nico's Barbershop and Kitty's Cakes.
That's
on a
right.
corner there.
Yeah. And then also one across from Max and Irma's.
Right.
So, and I can't remember if that was a Sinclair. I can't remember what it was, but that's a small real estate office now.
And I
attorney's
believe
office.
all of those were here in the 60s. Even when my wife and I moved here in early 92, the Sohio was here on the
That's
corner.
right. The Sohio was the last to go. The other two went much earlier than that, but the Sohio was the last to go. That's right.
Other businesses, a lot of people will come to German Village thinking we'll have a lot of antique shops. And I think probably in the past that might have been true, that there were some.
There were
shops like
actually
that.
two side by side where Katzinger's is now. And that Katzinger's was two separate shops. There was a wonderful family there that had a small antique store, and I am positive that those were two antique stores side by side at one time there. But the smaller shop that's further south, that was a wonderful couple, and of course I had this family that loved older things, so we were always in there looking at some of the older things that they had. And then again, the Nutcrackers, as you said, there were two right on 3rd Street for a while in the Red Stable. Oh, gosh.
Do you remember Marnie's and the Marianne Plots, when the current book loft was a little alley of shops?
I do remember that, but more than that, I remember the Old World Bazaar.
I'd like to hear you tell me about that.
Oh, well, gosh, that was, of course, I have to think I must have been in high school or college then. But that was a place where you would bring people from out of town, and they had many small shops in there. And it was kind of this original local thing that we have again now that's so popular, of great little shops and stores where you could find all kinds of neat things, unique presents and things for people.
And that had been a streetcar barn.
Oh yeah, and it was always busy. And then of course down the street from that was a German restaurant. Oh gosh, what was the name of that?
This was at almost to Livingston.
Almost to Livingston, yeah.
Carolyn?
Well, it was Carolyn's, but it was a German restaurant before that, yeah. So that, gosh, Carolyn's, that must have been in the 70s as well. I think that was a wonderful restaurant. It was wonderful. And then Lindy's, before it was Lindy's, and the Linden House. So.
That was at a time when I can't think of his name, who owned that and started Max and Irma's.
Oh, Barry Zaks.
Barry Zaks.
Yeah.
Did you remember him?
Yes, and John worked for him.
Oh.
So John worked for Mr. Zaks, and one of the great stories about Mr. Zaks is he would drive down to come into the village. He would drive down Sycamore Street, coming from High Street to 3rd Street. And the Thomas family lived there on the corner. They've been here forever. I can't think, they moved here in the 50s or 60s and had a huge, wonderful family. And Mrs. Thomas asked one thing of her husband, that wherever they moved, they could live across the street from a church, so she could walk to Mass with her children. And so he kept that promise, and that was their home. But Mr. Zaks would challenge the guys. They had built they built the garage, maybe the addition to the house, and they had put up a basketball court, and he would challenge them, can you shoot the ball from the street? Can you do this? Can you do that? And then he'd reward him with $1 or whatever. So,
But he owned a lot. He owned, like you said, where Lindy's is now, and Max and Irma's. He also had the Claremont, too, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
On South High.
And he also owned St. Mary's School, the old building that was on Mohawk Street, that's now a private residence.
He owned that.
He owned that at one time. Yeah.
Did he have businesses?
I can't remember what he did with that, but I know I think he may have been the person to buy the building from St. Mary's. I may be wrong about that. But that's been exciting to see all the changes with that. Of course, it was a bank. It's been many things over the year, but it's great to see it as a private home now.
I want you to tell me what you've seen change the most in the village. Here we are, 50 some odd years into the preservation movement, and you've seen it as a little girl from about the time that all started. How has the neighborhood changed?
You know, it's not the change that amazes me. It's the love and the community that I see that's continued from that time of being a small child until today. And I love it. Maybe the biggest change is that preservation is so important to the people here now. So as opposed to modernizing, people really understand the value of these older homes, how beautiful and unique they are, and they can't be duplicated. So that's been a wonderful thing to see here through the years. I remember when the house across the street from me here was the pink house. I don't know if you've heard that. And
No.
as they painted it a couple of years ago, this is when I was a kid. I'm sure it was the pink house then. And they were scraping off paint, and some of that, when flaking off their layers of paint, I saw some of the pink, and that brought back a great memory to me. So there was a family that lived there years ago. It's just been exciting to see how important preservation is to people. But honestly, the community has been great, is great, and I can't imagine living anywhere else in the city. My husband and I have discussed it often. We think we're in the best place we could be.
Do you see any changes that you don't particularly like, or do you know of any particular pressures on the village that we should be particularly mindful of, given that you have quite a history here and know what's gone on for quite some time?
One of the things I said, you know, we spoke earlier, and I said it's exciting to see people who have raised a family in the suburbs and have been in wonderful school systems like Upper Arlington, where I worked, come here to the village. And it does worry me sometimes that people want large houses, that they're kind of bringing that suburban size of a home here. We live in 1,000 square feet. It's plenty of room for us. You live in a small home as well. There's a great simplicity to that, and it's a beautiful way to be able to downsize and, as I said, have a tiny home without having a trailer home, you know, a small modern home. And so I do hope that as people come here, they can learn to value those small homes and maybe consider those. That worries me a little. I think, oh gosh, when we sell, is this going to be a rental property, or can someone see it the same way we see it, as a wonderful home to live in?
Anything else?
No, we love German Village, and we love our neighbors. I think one thing that people might be very surprised about in German Village is that it really is like a small town. I feel like I know my neighbors, and that they care about us and we care about them. And it's not an impersonal place to live at all. It really is a wonderful community where people care about one another and want the best for one another.